It was a Saturday night, and roughly 11:30 p.m. when I staggered home from a friend's party. It was dark out, and most people had gone home to bed by now, so the streets were silent. But there was something not quite right about this night. Something that made my hair stand on end. I didn't know what caused it, but I was sure going to find out. After 10 minutes of walking, I finally reached the familiar street. The trees around the road had begun to get thicker and denser as my house was in the outskirts of town. At this point, I was exhausted. I hadn't had that much to drink at the party, but I was still tired nonetheless. After all, my parents weren't going to pick me up, not after being at a party half sober. I continued onward across a barren street. I had lost track of time and was trying to stop myself from collapsing on the curb. After a few more minutes of walking, I came across the road split and where I could choose one of two routes back home. I remembered one was quite long and ran through the forest, but still led to my house. The other one was faster and the shorter route. For me, there was only one option. I began to follow the shorter path that led me through the tunnel to my home. I had never been through this tunnel at night before, but it didn't seem to bother me. It leads underneath a normally quite busy road, but since it was roughly 11:40 at night now, I didn't really expect it to be. After about 5 minutes of walking, I finally came to the bridge with the tunnel leading towards my home. At last, I thought to myself, as I approached the void of the darkness in front of me. However, this is when things started to turn strange. As I approached the tunnel, I felt this abnormal, eerie feeling that I had never felt before. It was strange because it made my hair stand on end just thinking about it. But as I got closer, it got worse until I was eventually at the mouth of the tunnel. I held my breath as I peered into the pitch blackness of what I had to travel through to get home. The only sources of light seemed to be a few lamps that hung slowly overhead. Every so often, they would flicker on and off, making the emptiness of the tunnel even more devoid. As I looked in deeper, I could see the faint light that was in the end of the tunnel caused by the moonlight seeping in. Normally, I wasn't afraid of the dark, but there was nothing comforting about this darkness. No, it just seemed empty, like all the lights had been scared away by some presence. My eyes were flickering from what light there still were. With my heart racing, I continued forward. The other thing that sent a chill down my spine was the silence. The eerie silence that loomed all around me, that didn't feel quite right. It seemed to pierce my eardrums as the sound of rustling leaves outside had long gone. I was alone in the tunnel, caked in utter silence. Yet, it was that silence that caused me to jump a foot in the air when I heard it. The laugh seemed to come from the entrance of the tunnel. My head spun around to the entrance, expecting to see someone or something. Of course there was nothing, just the same gloomy light that lit up at the end of the tunnel. The only thing that my eyes greeted was this seemingly internal darkness that seemed to act like a blanket around the tunnel. That frightened me even more as my eyes darted to every movement. I was no longer tired anymore. I was frightened, terrified even. I just wanted to get out of that goddamn tunnel before something else freakishly weird happened. Yet at the same time, a part of my mind told me that it was just my imagination. After all, I had been drinking and I was exhausted, so maybe it was nothing. Just a figment of my imagination, maybe. I didn't just walk now, I ran as fast as I could down the tunnel, the old lamps flashing past me like they never existed. I must have been more than halfway through the tunnel, and the exit was clearly visible. See, I told myself, we're almost out. Must have been your imagination. These words were almost obliterated from my mind when I saw what was waiting for me at the exit. I saw what I believed was a silhouette of a young girl at the end of the tunnel. Her hair was long and it seemed to drop down to her feet. And her eyes, those eyes will forever haunt me. Those green ovals that shone in the consuming darkness around her were like nothing I had ever seen in my life. I was utterly petrified as I tried to free my body from the trance I was in. I called out to her. "Hello? Are you okay?" The girl didn't respond. Instead, she crouched down with her piercing green eyes still fixated on me. Her sudden movements made me jump and shiver at the same time. Her presence didn't seem like any ordinary girl. Something different. Something wrong. Just very wrong. I couldn't take it anymore. I looked away and began to back away slowly. I no longer cared about getting home. I just wanted to escape. As I did this, she let out a high-pitched scream that made me clutch my ears in pain. Her eyes continued to follow me. My mind was telling me to run, but my eyes were once again fixated and unwilling to let my body move. Finally, the girl opened her mouth, revealing her teeth that stuck jagged out of her jaw. I yelled in terror as my heart seemed to pound out of my chest. Even though I was looking forward, I could still feel those eyes burning into the back of my head. Looking at me, she was a predator, and I was her prey. I raced down the tunnel into the surrounding darkness. For a moment there was a sense of relief. I was out of the tunnel and into the open, but I still didn't know where she was. I panted heavily, gasping for air as I took the time to look behind me. My heart once again stopped at a standstill as I saw it standing there in front of me. Its bear trap of a mouth hung open and its green eyes glowing into the night. I just stared at it helplessly, unable to escape the likely fate I faced. I grunted in defeat and whispered under my breath, "What do you want?" She smiled at me, almost delighted that I asked it, and she spoke. "I want peace." I just stood there and stared at it, unsure what to say or do. Yet for some reason I felt sorry for it, almost like something inside me could understand what it was saying. I replied after much consideration of what to say. I replied, "I'm sorry. I can't help you. I need to go home." The girl let out a high-pitched scream, causing me to cover my ears once more. I couldn't remember anything after that. It was a sudden blur, and then blackness. Next morning, I woke up on the curb with the biggest headache I had ever had in my life. My head throbbed as I squinted at the bright light shining through the trees. I was tempted to just lie there for a bit, even though my back hurt from lying on the solid concrete. Was all that a dream? Could it have been my imagination or the fact I was tired? I then looked at the shortcut pathway for a brief moment before whispering to myself, "Never again." After that, I got home. Everything seemed to be okay. My parents were worried sick. I told them that I had been to a party and passed out on the curb, a story they're more likely to believe than the one I remember. Later that night, I decided to look up the history of that tunnel and the bridge itself. A young girl was murdered in that very tunnel, and ever since then, reportings of strange noises could be heard coming from the tunnel. I still had no idea what happened back at the tunnel. Was it really a dream or just a hallucination? But I am sure of this. I'll never forget those eyes. Those piercing green eyes that followed my every move. I still feel them today, burning into the back of my head. Even when I'm with friends, I have this feeling that those eyes will never leave me. Even now when I write this, I still feel like I'm being watched. It will never go away. Never leave me.